Good evening. This is our last night of this advanced class. And you will be happy to know that within a few weeks this class will be heard in England, South Africa, Australia, the United States, and Canada. And groups of people will be sitting around just as we are here tonight, listening to this self-same class. And you will remember that it will be the consciousness of this class, the depth of the consciousness of this class, that will be conveying itself to those who are hearing, so that the degree of fruitage that is received will be proportionate to the degree of silence that has been maintained here. Not merely physical silence, but that inner silence that you feel when you're at the center of your being. You see, words are not power. Words are effects. Speech is not power. Speech is an effect. Only in the human scene are people swayed by speech, swayed by oratory or acting, and that is because they are listening not with their intelligence but with their emotions. And when people listen with their emotions can be played upon, and therefore they respond. And so it is that if somebody cries fire, the emotion is one of danger, and they respond to that, and panic follows. And so it is when they're looking at dramas. Their whole thought is filled with the emotion of sympathy and fear. And when they're listening to comedy, there's another emotion that is aroused. But when you are hearing a spiritual message, you are not supposed to be listening with your emotions. You are supposed to be as nearly devoid of emotions as you can possibly be, so that you hear only the Word of God. And then you do not hear it from the standpoint of what you knew or believed, but from the standpoint of the message as it is. Now, a message must come out through one whose consciousness has settled back into a spiritual state of peace. But it must also be received by those in some measure of spiritual peace in order to register in its fullness. And so it is that the very atmosphere of your consciousness as you sit there is providing consciousness of this message as it goes out through the tape, so that not only the consciousness of the teacher is there, but the entire consciousness of the room is there. And that means that those who hear it will hear a greater depth of consciousness. You do understand, I'm sure, that even a room, the walls of a room and the ceiling and the floors, take on the atmosphere of consciousness. That is why if you go into a church where there is a minister, a rabbi, a priest of true spiritual dedication, you should be able to sit in that church and receive all manner of quiet, peace, and even healing. Not so much while the service is going on as when the church is empty, or when very few are there. Wherever there is dedication, an atmosphere is evolved. In India, where they do not have organized religion, even the poorest home has a little corner set apart and dedicated for its religious activity. And where it's possible, each member of the family has a little corner in a different room. But even if there's only one in the home, that one little spot is kept dedicated. Usually there are some fresh flowers, even if it's just one fresh flower that is kept there. Very often fruit, even one piece of fresh fruit is put there each day, and a picture or a statue, anything that will bring to light a sense of dedication. And of course you can set a flower and dedicate it to the invisible presence and power, and that very dedication sets this space apart as the place where God stands or is or fills. So it is that in many teachings it is said that it is best to do your praying or meditating in the same room every day, if possible in the same chair. And the reason is that by virtue of setting aside one corner or one chair, you bring to that spot the measure of your dedication, the measure of your humility, your recognition of the presence and power of God, and you'd be surprised how quickly the chair takes on that atmosphere. That is why the woman breaking through the throng could touch the hem of the robe of the Master and be healed. Now, it wasn't that his robe was spiritual, it was only that he was the living Spirit. And by living continuously in that dedication, as he did, his very clothing took on the atmosphere of his consciousness. You perhaps have gone into the office of some people and immediately felt a peace when you entered, quiet. You've undoubtedly gone into the presence of other people and felt disturbance. And the whole answer is their state of consciousness made manifest in the room. The importance of this is this. Whenever you come to me or think of me, you are entering my consciousness. And if I have not prepared a place for you in my consciousness, if I have not kept my consciousness pure, then when you come in, you get nothing. You may even get disturbance, but even if you didn't, you would get nothing of a spiritual value. The value of your entering my consciousness is that you are entering the Christ if my consciousness has been prepared. Now, I only use myself as an illustration because this is the truth about you. When your family comes into your home, which is really their own home, but you, as the wife or mother or head of the household, you are the consciousness into which they come. The husband, when he comes home from his work, is not coming into rooms. He's coming into your consciousness, and he's going to get whatever you have prepared for him. When your children come in, and when they go out, they are coming into your consciousness, and they're going to get whatever they find there. Barrenness, stoniness, or fertile soil, enriched consciousness. Now, it is strange but true that you are the determining factor as to what you have in your house, in your consciousness. If you have awakened in the morning and filled yourself with the realization of the presence of God, if you have spent your day trying to maintain that atmosphere, and nobody says to you that it's easy. The way is straight and narrow, and few there be that enter. It isn't easy. That's not the point. The point is whether or not you continue until you succeed, until it does become easy to maintain yourself in a spiritual state of consciousness. Then when your husband walks into it, when your children walk into it, they walk into peace, comfort. My peace give I unto you. You're the only one who can determine whether that's true, whether you are giving the Christ peace to those who enter your home, your spiritual household, your consciousness. If you haven't prepared a place for your family, they can't find a place in you or in your home. They can't find peace, they can't find comfort, they can't find happiness, they can't find rest or prosperity, because four walls will not give it to them, unless the four walls have been permeated with your degree of spiritual consciousness. But it is really consciousness that determines what happens to us in our relationship with others. If I maintain a consciousness of distrust, of suspicion, of fear, of resentment, of discord, do you not see that the very moment you enter my consciousness you feel confusion and chaos? Where, if I have overcome fears, hates, resentments, jealousies, malice, if I have overcome in some degree attachment to the things of this world, if within myself I am trying to maintain a consciousness of I and the Father are one, and all that the Father hath is mine here and now, the place whereon I stand is holy ground, if I am trying to maintain a consciousness of praying for my enemies, of forgiving 70 times 7, then when you enter my consciousness you feel a sense of peace. Then you settle into that sense of peace, and healing, harmony automatically follows. The world gives back to us what we send out to it. We cast our bread upon the waters, and it either comes back fresh bread with butter, jam, and sugar, or else it comes back sour bread and stony hard. But in either case, we are responsible. If we are giving out criticism, judgment, hatreds, resentments, withholdingness, that's the bread that we are casting upon the waters, and that's what comes back to us. If we are giving out these other qualities, that's what comes back to us. The question is asked here, is that always true? No, it isn't true in the case of every individual that you meet in your life. There are always some so impervious, so resistant to truth, that they can be as nasty to you as anyone in the world can be. But really, that doesn't disturb you, because you're not counting on every single person in the world any more than they can count on you being in this atmosphere 100% of the time. You find that kind of difficult. But you will find that the odd 1, 2, or 3 that comes into your life and does not respond with love, joy, and peace, that you can afford to ignore. You can afford to pay no attention to, and pretty soon they will drop out of your life. Sometimes they're members of our own families, but that's the way it has to be. But the main point is this, that on the whole, you can count on this, that the degree of spiritual awareness that occupies your time and thought and energy is the degree of good that is coming back into your experience. As you know, the Hebrew prophet, when he found this penniless widow about to lose her son into slavery because she had no money, his question was, "What have you in the house?" And that seems like a very sad question to ask a penniless widow, doesn't it? But he asked it, and he really meant it. Search around there. What have you? Because I can't add anything to you. I can only draw out of you what you already have, and if you haven't got it, too bad. In the same way, when the Master came with the multitudes who were an hungered, and the disciples came to him wondering what to do about it, his question also was, what have we? What have we? He already knew what we didn't have. What he wanted to know is, what have we? And fortunately, we had a few loaves and fishes. In the case of the widow, he said, then pour. And it never ran dry. The cruse of oil kept flowing. And the Master to the disciples, break, share, eat. Just a few loaves and fishes that you have. Break, share, eat. And there were 12 baskets full left over after everybody ate. So it is with us. Nobody lives our lives for us unless we let them. If we determine that the nature of our lives is to be spiritual, that we are going to train ourselves to be less and less resentful, less and less concerned about the actions of other people, and more concerned about our reaction to their actions, then we will quickly see that the world begins to give back to us what we give out to it. Now, of course, the major thing that we have to give out is our knowledge of truth, and we do not have to give it out orally or even in writing. If I abide in the center of my being and realize that Christ is the life of your being, that Christ is your true identity, spiritual sonship is your true identity, and that you are constituted only of those things which emanate from God, and the qualities which do not correspond to that, the negative qualities of life, these are not yours. These belong to the carnal mind, and they are not power, and they are not law, and they are not cause. And you know something? That even if I never voice that to you, and if I come into your life in just some odd, impersonal way, you will feel a bond with me. You will feel a kinship or a oneness or a friendship, even though you yourself may not know why. Now, it isn't that I directed any of this at you, personally or individually. It is that I abide in this as the truth of being about God and God's creation. And I am quick to realize that the negative aspects of man's conduct, deportment, activities, does not represent the evil in man, but the evil of the universal belief of good and evil, the universal belief of the carnal mind. And as I go further and realize that it has no law to support it, avenue to function in, no instrument for expression, that really is taking the burden of guilt, the burden of evil off of you, and you feel it and you respond to it. Now, as you do this, whether you are trading in a market, grocery shop, whether you're traveling by bus, in a hotel, whether you're in business or in the home, the world responds to your degree of spiritual consciousness and gives back to you that which you have given out. So that really and truly, the main function of our daily life is to watch and see what we have in our consciousness and what we are allowing people to walk into when they come to us, socially, commercially, or any other capacity. When you know that you're entertaining company, you're quick to straighten up your home and dust it and clean it because you wish to entertain guests in a clean home. But I can assure you that you can afford to leave quite a bit of dirt around there without them even noticing it, if you are inviting them into a clean consciousness. And I'm not speaking now of just human cleanliness, I mean spiritual cleanliness, the type that is busy knowing spiritual truth about God, about this universe, about individual and being, law, cause. Let us, who expect as a result of this classwork that there will be people coming into our consciousness to seek that which we have found, because it's an impossibility to have even one ray of light without somebody in darkness wanting to come to share it. Therefore, whatever ray of light you have received in this class, be assured you're going to be called on to share it. And therefore, it is going to be necessary to realize every single day, what kind of a home am I inviting people into? What kind of a home are people going to find when they come to my consciousness? Because on that determines the entire health of the spiritual ministry. Above all, let no one find in your consciousness condemnation. Now, this doesn't mean that you don't have opinions. You are perhaps more firmly established in your opinions if you have spiritual wisdom than would otherwise be the case. This doesn't mean being foolish and saying, what difference does it make who governs our country or what kind of a parliament or congress we have, or we'll let anybody get in there because they're all spiritual. Now, that's really stupidity. If we have a clear consciousness, if we have this consciousness of man's true identity, it will be pointed out to us who comes nearest to approaching that in and for that particular position. In other words, we will, just as we are guided to each other as patients and practitioners, students and teachers, just so we are guided to vote for the right candidates or the right parties at any given time. It is right to have an opinion about world problems. It isn't right to be aggressive about it, because you cannot establish. Ah, yes, let's come to that right away. There has never been a time since the first recorded piece of history when the world has not used material force to gain its way and its will. And with all of the so-called progress, I shouldn't say so-called, there has been progress, with all of the progress that has been made, the progress hasn't been quite along the line of giving up material force. So that we find in the 20th century that the world has not learned the lesson that you do not get your way or win your victories with material force. You may win a battle, but you lose the war. Or you may win this particular war or engagement and find that you've lost a lot more than you gained, or that you have to fight it all over again anyhow. In other words, very seldom has a war accomplished its purpose, except temporarily. And always it seems that the powers who become great powers in the world, the great power of Rome, the great power of Greece, the great power that has come to one nation or group of nations down through their history, always ends in their losing it, always ends in their defeat, always ends in their being broken. It is inevitable. Those who live by the sword must die by the sword, and if you do not believe that, why play around with Christianity, with the teachings of Jesus Christ? If you have not yet come to see that with whatever measure ye meet, it's going to be measured back to you, what's the use then of pretending to follow the teaching of Jesus Christ? Because you can't benefit just by signing your name to a register. You have to benefit by obedience to the teaching, to the principles. Now, in all of this that's going on in our world today, you can see how desperately some people are trying to get the nations of this world not only to set up laws, but after they set up, to abide by them, rather than to keep on having more wars and more wars and more wars. The outward success at this moment does not look too great, but the inevitable success is assured, because as time goes on, progress is being made, whether or not it's being made in the experience of a few individuals here or there. There is enough of it being made so that the world is hearing about it, and there are advocates in high places trying to show the world that we must live by law rather than by force. Now, while you and I, as citizens of a country, must fulfill our obligations as citizens, that goes without saying that as a citizen of a country, the country has no money except the money of its citizens. And therefore, it is your money, your earnings, your taxes that go to the support of your nation. And while we all agree that these last two wars have resulted in an amount of taxation that is no longer reasonable or even fair or even honest, nevertheless, as citizens, we do have to fulfill ourselves in our taxes. Well, in the same way, if the ignorance of our governmental leaders should get us in wars, as that same ignorance has done in every previous war, Then, also as citizens, we have functions to perform. We have to render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. We can't run and hide our head and say, I will not fulfill my duty as a citizen, but I'll let you go out, my neighbor, and do it for me. No. In whatever way is necessary, we are called upon to accept our responsibility as citizens. We may not always agree with our government and what they're doing. We may not always agree that they're in the right. But one thing we cannot do is shirk the responsibility that comes to us as citizens. Now, in the old days when we disagreed, we could take up arms. Today we know that that's not the way. At best, it's only a temporary victory, and at a too high a cost. But we do have this with which to work. Even while we are rendering unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, even while we are obeying the law of the land in service, whether in paying taxes or serving in the army, even while we're doing that and knowing the wrongness of it humanly, we can be about our special business of prayer, of realization, of bringing the realization of the kingdom of God to earth through our consciousness. We can be helping to settle the affairs of the world, not by might and not by power, but by the Spirit of God. So that while we today are in the midst of a turmoil, the result of which no one can foresee with any degree of accuracy, even while we know that humanly we are so little, so nobody, so unimportant to this world, to the governments, that they wouldn't listen to us if we spoke and wouldn't read our letters if we wrote them to them. Nevertheless, we can be a bigger power than the man that built the atom bomb, because we have learned a principle, not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit. Now you must remember that it is expected of you that in some degree you are going to do healing work. And I will tell you right from the start that if you are to be successful, it will have to be through this principle, not by might, not by physical might, nor by mental power, because either one of those would be attesting to the power of man whose breath is in his nostril, but by my Spirit. And so it is, when you sit down to help someone, one of the very first thoughts that will come into your mind is, not by might, not by power, this is not going to be accomplished that way, but by the Spirit of God. For where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. And so you will learn to sit quietly, to lift your thought to God, to ponder these spiritual realities, and then finally to settle into a peace in which there are no thoughts and no words, and to wait for that Spirit of the Lord God to be upon you, which announces the healing and the harmony. Well, now you see, it is the same identical way. To follow the practice of the Christ means not to use physical powers, not to use mental powers, but to be still. And let the Spirit of the Lord God be upon you, and let it flow out into this universe, touching those, affecting those who are receptive and responsive. Now, strangely enough, you can never know humanly who they are that are receptive and responsive to truth. The very hard-boiled, loud-speaking, even profane characters are at times more receptive and responsive to truth than the most gentle little mouse or mousy person. Sometimes the heaviest sinner is more easily reached than the most righteous person that you have ever met. Very often, our most difficult work is with the good people who are good and know it. They are very difficult to reach spiritually. The sinner who knows it and acknowledges it is more easily reached, because they make a vacuum into which the Spirit can rush, whereas the other person who is holding up their goodness and their righteousness and their uprightness is just making a barrier that not even God can get through. Because, you see, the truth is this: as we have learned in this impersonal Christ, there is no one good, and there is no one righteous. It's an impossibility. I of my own self can do nothing, and I of my own self can be nothing. God is the only righteous one. God is the only right one. God is the only good one. And if we are sufficiently nothingness, the Spirit of God can function through us. So it is. You have no way of knowing who the individual is, or where, or when, who may be struck as Saul of Tarsus was struck, with blinding light, and awaken out of that Saulness into Paulness. There wasn't anyone more hardened in his way than Saul of Tarsus. There wasn't anyone with a heavier wall against the Christ. There was only one thing in Saul's favor, and that is that since childhood he'd been seeking God. And so at least if he didn't believe in the Christ, he also didn't believe in Saul. He knew that God alone was all. And therefore, with all of his toughness and hardness and what seemed to be badness, he, above all the others, received that tremendous light of the Christ. None of us has any idea who may be reached by the Christ and see the light and be in a position high in the affairs of the world where their influence can throw the situation onto the side of spiritual power. It is for this reason that even if we comment on the qualities of this one, that one, or the other one, we do not in the same breath condemn, for it may be that very one who may have the awakening. Now I ask you to see this. It is part of the nature of this impersonal Christ. Since it is not a person who is going to save this world, It is not a person who is going to come forth with an idea. It is the Christ. And the individual in the right place at the right time, with the degree of receptivity, will be the individual through whom it will appear to come. But you and I do not have to judge or appoint them. You and I do not have to even wonder who they are or where. We need only dwell in the realization that salvation will come not by might, nor by power, but by the Spirit of God. And your function and mine, then, is to be an instrument through which the presence of God can touch humanity. Really, it is our only reason for living. Any other reason is a waste of time. Just to stay around on earth for another 10 or 15 or 20 years is a waste of time, unless there is some function in it, some reason in it, and it must be a far greater reason than just adding another family to this earth, an earth that seems to have about as many families as it can take care of. But we have been drawn to the spiritual path. You have not chosen the spiritual path. It has chosen you. If it were possible for you or me to choose the spiritual path, then there's no reason why there shouldn't be 1 million of us here. Because I'm sure that there are many millions right here in the city of London who would choose this path if they had the capacity. They haven't. They haven't, or they would be here or in some similar place. You have not chosen me, I have chosen you. And when God has put his finger on you, you are on your way home and you're going to reach there. Oh, there may be lots of bypass and there may be lots of bumps along the road. But it is inevitable that every one of us will one day rest in the bosom of the Father, and we do not have to die to accomplish it. It can be done here on earth, not by might, nor by power, but by a continuous surrender to the will of God, to a continuous emptying out of the self and letting the Spirit of the Lord God be upon us. This is called the mystical way of life, and it is also called impractical. So impractical that there's no use trying it. But then you who have been healed of anything spiritually, or who have been responsible for a healing, you do know that there is a way that does not involve the use of might or of power. You do know that there is a way of not resisting evil, and yet seeing wonderful healings take place, wonderful unfoldments of health, harmony, of supply, of spiritual uplift, of better human relationships. There is a question here. In view of the fact that Jesus sometimes used touch when healing, will you comment on contact healing? The only comment that I can make is this. In our work, it has not been found necessary to touch anyone or to make a physical contact of any kind. I presume that you already know that in the beginning of the metaphysical practice, that was Mrs. Eddy's earliest practice, there were physical contacts. they were slightly different than those of today. In those early days, the practitioner and the patient would sit back to back so that their spinal cords touched. And if they did not sit that way, they sat knee to knee so that their knees touched. And in that way, a contact was established which was deemed necessary to the healing work. But when Mrs. Eddy learned that some of the boys and girls weren't quite behaving under that system, she decided that it would be better for them to be sick than to be healed that way. And so she undoubtedly experimented and found that healing could take place just as well without that contact, and from then on she forbade any physical contact in her work. Now, I am not unmindful of this, that there are people who have become aware that when they touch someone, that there is a power goes through their hand that results in healing. Now, I have met several of these, and they're very honorable people, and those that I'm speaking about, I know do good healing work. And they actually do feel a power course through their hand. Well, of course, I'm in no position to say that they could do the healing work just as well without, because they probably couldn't unless they themselves came to the realization that physical contact was not necessary. Therefore, I would say this: everyone has to follow that which is their own inner light. And if there are people led to a place in consciousness where it has been made clear to them that their power runs through their hand instead of through consciousness, I'm sure that it is absolutely right for them to heal in that way. We do not teach it in the message of the infinite way, and we know that it is not necessary from the standpoint of infinite way practice. If an individual finds that that is their way of practice, they may not call it infinite way healing, because it is not infinite way healing. It may be spiritual, and undoubtedly is, but it is not in accordance with the infinite way practice. And I will caution you about this also. We are not organized as a religious body. Therefore, we are not under the protection of any legal law. And for that reason, it may be that if you do any of this laying on of hands or touching patients or recommending water or something, that you may find yourself under the legal law of practicing medicine without a license. The only protection that we have is the protection that is given to us by our own spiritual integrity. That's our only protection. We have no legal protection. There are no legal laws. But if we continue our ministration purely through prayer, there is no law in the world against us, for no nation has yet created a law forbidding prayer. Therefore, we are inside the range of all law as long as our ministry is a prayer ministry. But the very moment that we recommend that someone should take this remedy or that, even as innocent a thing as a vitamin pill, it can be construed that you are practicing medicine. Therefore, if your patient wants to take vitamins, there's nothing against that. It's a food. It's not a medicine. It's not a remedy. That is their business, but don't you recommend it, because you will be recommending the use of what is known as a remedy. And it could be said that you are practicing medicine. And then you'll find yourself in trouble with the law. In the same way, if you touch a patient, it may be construed that that is some form of chiropractic or osteopathy or some other thing that here and there may not be legal. So for our purpose, please remember that ours is a prayer ministry. We do not have to be physically present with our patient. They can be in far off Australia or Hawaii or the North or South Pole. And our work would be just as effective if they themselves realized the nature of prayer work. Now, the entire secret of successful prayer work is not by might nor by power, not by words or by thoughts, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. And so the degree of quiet that you can attain within, the degree of inner peace, so that the Spirit of the Lord can flow, will be the degree of your success. It is for this reason that we do not look for mental causes for physical diseases. In the human picture, there may be some mental causes for physical diseases. I'm not quite as much of a believer in it as some are, but probably there are some things in that nature. But that's not our business. We don't care what caused it, we care what cures it. And we know what cures it, the Spirit of the Lord God, nothing else. Nothing else, it's the Spirit. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Now the question is, how do we attain the conscious realization of the presence? And there you have the principles, the correct letter as it is embodied in the message of the infinite way. So leave the subject of touching the patient to those who are led to that, and never sit in judgment on it. There is no such thing as a right or a wrong. It is just a question of whatever is, that's the way it is. Students of the infinite way around this globe must accept the responsibility for the world conditions of today. It has been said, and I'm sure rightly said, that you're getting the kind of government you deserve. And everyone does. And sometimes that's hard to believe, but it's true. It doesn't mean that you individually may be responsible for a bad government. It does mean that the vast majority of the citizens of any country are responsible for the type of government they've got, and when they don't want it, it won't be that way. Now, for this reason, we don't need majorities. One with God is a majority. If there are 10 righteous men in the city may be saved. In other words, we have no way of knowing the degree of power there is in one individual consciously realizing the presence of God. So then, since our faith is not in might or in power, our real faith isn't in the ballot either, because that's merely the might of numbers, of percentages. Our ultimate reliance is in the degree of our awareness of that presence of God, in the degree of our realization of the impersonal nature of the Christ as being the seat of government, not man whose breath is in his nostril, Christ. Therefore, let us accept the responsibility. And remember, I don't mean that English people should accept the responsibility of government in England and Americans should accept the responsibility of government in America. Oh no, that is stupidity. That is drawing a line about mine and thine. That's even believing that you may have all the good in England and they may have all the evil somewhere else and you won't get any of that evil, and don't believe it. Don't believe it. The world today, is within 10 hours of the extremes of it. You can go almost any place in the world today in 10 hours, 20 hours now, but next year or the year after it'll be 10. Yes, all the way from Sydney, Australia to London next year is going to be done in 12 hours. And those are the extremes of space. And so you see that anything that takes place in Australia can affect you in England and affect us even more so in Hawaii. So let us not be concerned about the government of England, Ireland, Wales, or South Africa, but of the world, of the spiritual kingdom being humanly manifest. And let us realize that the government is upon his shoulder. The government of mankind, the government of the world, world government, until we do come to that day when we realize why this world isn't governed by might or by power, but by the Spirit of the Lord. And do you not see that in reality there are no boundaries? Boundaries are man-made things. And when you travel 20,000 feet up in the air in an airplane and look down, sometimes you have a feeling where you want to laugh out loud when you see those fences down there around people's property, and you say they really believe they own it. And from up here you can see that the earth is the Lord's. It's just one great big round ball. And it doesn't belong to anybody down there at all. It doesn't belong to any nation. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Down here it looks kind of natural to have a fence around it and say, don't come in here, this belongs to me. But it looks foolish from up there. And so it is from a higher spiritual state of consciousness, it looks foolish to pray for your land or my land, or for your people or my people. Because unless we see God as your Father and my Father, our prayers aren't worth the time they take to evolve. All right, we're going to have a rest now.